Hello again. This is In Conservation With, a series of Zoom interviews with some of the movers and shakers in the conservation world. And we've been doing this now. I've been doing this now since the lockdown began back in 2020, and it's been carrying on ever since. And tonight, or today, we have a very special guest, Professor Richard Gregory. I mean, I've known him always as Richard. We know each other from our past at the British Trust for Ornithology. We both worked there in the early days. But Richard, before I go any further, let me ask you, how are you and where are you?
I'm absolutely fine, David. Lovely to be chatting to you. I'm back at home. I live just outside Cambridge, so that's where I am speaking to you tonight.
Good. And as I just mentioned, we did work together years ago, and I remember we even played football together.
Yes, we did. Yeah, yeah. I remember playing at the bird fair and winning a cup at the bird fair, playing football.
Well, for those who don't know who Richard is, is basically, well, you work for the RSPB, you studied ecology in York University, completed a doctorate in epimo epi, uh, epidemiology. Is that right?
Epidemiology. Yeah.
Epidemiology, yeah. I'll tell you what, I can't, my reading skills have declined in my older age. You completed a doctorate in epidemiology and ecology at Oxford University before moving on to hold a junior research fellowship at St. Cross College in Oxford. And then from there, you joined the British Trust for Ornithology as the head of census unit, working to design and set up bird monitoring schemes and to understand trends before moving on to join the RSPB, where you are now, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds. And you were the head of monitoring in conservation science in 1999. You were made an honorary professor at the Centre of Biodiversity and Environment Research, University of College London in 2016, and spent time working there and teaching. And you also work at the David Attenborough Building in Cambridge as the RSPB is a partner in the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. I could go on. You've done a lot in your short time on this planet. And you are obviously involved in a wide range of research collaborations with academics, NGOs and government agencies, engaging with nature practice and policy at national and international level. And of course, on top of all of that, you're a keen birder and naturalist. So
Yes.
thank you very much for coming along tonight. What we're talking about today really is quite a grim subject, I suppose. It's the state of the nature in the UK, the State of Nature report, which has been published just last week for 2023. It's a report that's published every 4 years. Is that right?
3 or 4 years. That's right. For 4 years on this occasion. Yeah, from the last one. Yeah.
And, I think what we could do, first of all, if you don't mind, if you can show us the background to this report so we can all have a kind of a context, and then we can kind of ask questions from there. Because, I mean, I've been talking about it being grim, but for those who may not understand or know what's going on, you may not realize what I'm talking about. So maybe, Richard, if you don't mind, if you can show us your PowerPoint very quickly.
Yeah.
And obviously, those who are watching, you can put your screen on speaker view, and you get the full unadulterated version of it.
Can you see that screen okay now, David?
We can, yeah.
Yes. Really pleased to be here to talk to you about this kind of what's been described as a landmark study, kind of in the United Kingdom. And I'll tell you something about kind of where it came from, the partnership element there, and the main headlines. And as David said, it makes sort of frustrating, sort of depressing reading in a way. But what we've tried very hard in the report to say is that there's a real silver lining. We've never had such a good understanding of the state of nature, nor in fact, what's needed to fix it. So we've tried to present the information both kind of, to set the facts, clearly to audiences, but also say, well, come on, guys, we can really do something about it. We know how to fix nature. So State of Nature report, it was launched last Wednesday, and I should say straight away that the partnership is a huge part of the State of Nature. So the State of Nature partnership, we came together to create this partnership, to share knowledge and information together, to raise standards in biodiversity monitoring and practices. And this time around, the State of Nature partnership behind this report, over 60 organisations, and some of these little logos here will be familiar to some of you. I'm sure. We have all the leading environmental non-governmental organisations in the UK sort of as part of our team here. We have the top research organisations and institutes, people like the British Trust for Ornithology we've talked about, UKCEH, the people with statistical expertise in UKCEH. And importantly, and perhaps this got lost in some of the headlines last week at least, we have the government agencies, the statutory government agencies for the UK and for the 4 countries. And it might seem that this is another wildlife report. I think in the press, that's quickly how this becomes described, but it's a bit more than that. It's the collective view, using the best evidence, the best expertise from the government, non-government organisations, and the experts to say, what is the state of nature, what's driving it, how can we turn it around? So the strength of the document is that collectively in the UK and in the 4 countries, we have a shared evidence base. There's no debate really around kind of what's happening or why. We've worked really closely together to come together, and I think that's another positive as well from the report. So to explain the organisation of the report, what we also wanted to do was to set out the main facts and figures around how biodiversity was changing. And I'll tell you quite a lot about that. That's kind of my background and my expertise. But we also wanted to frame it around all the great stuff that's happening out there. There's some really sort of forward-looking, progressive ambitions on the global stage for biodiversity recovery and on the UK stage as well. So what we did in terms of organising the contents of our report was to focus some of the chapters around the stuff that we're doing, the good stuff we're doing to help nature, improving species status and improving the protected area network and nature-friendly practices and so on. So that's how we've sort of, we're setting the evidence of change around there in the report, but we're also then focusing on, let's focus on some of the great stories around the conservation heroes and the passionate action that's going on, because there's some amazing stuff going on to help nature in the UK. And let's talk about that too, so that we kind of have, we're describing where we are, but also what's the journey we want to go on collectively to improve that. And that's what we've sort of done in the report. And the power of volunteers. So David and I worked for quite a while, with the British Trust for Ornithology, and I think the British Trust for Ornithology is one of those organisations who really do bring out the power of volunteers. Citizen scientists are the backbone of the data we describe in this Data Nature report, and it's the collective effort of those thousands of really of these amazing, highly skilled amateur ornithologists who are dedicating their time and effort to do this biological recording in the UK. And we have a rich history of that in the UK, of that recording. And without that enthusiasm and that skill, we just wouldn't be able to report on nature as we can in the United Kingdom. Some of our wildlife monitoring is some of the best in the world, in fact. So I think we should be really, really proud of that and the contribution that the skilled volunteers are making to it. And that's something where all of us, you guys listening to this, could contribute really significantly to advancing our understanding. So the main headline, and David and I kind of touched on that in the introduction, it is, the bold, the outline, sobering conclusion from the report is this, and it's that, kind of UK's nature and the wider environment, according to the statistics we're able to pull together, just continues overall to decline and to degrade. But the message we wanted to bring out from the report was this line, our strap line is really, we've never had a better understanding of how biodiversity is changing in the UK, the state of nature, nor how to fix it. So that's what we wanted to try and to turn to kind of pivot the news from what we know to what we know we need to do, and learn from the great experiences, of conservation successes across the board for different taxa, different habitats, and I'll touch on some of that too. But to come back to what's the main what's the main information in this report, and why is it so important? Well, the main information that we're describing the state of nature comes in sort of three particular forms, really, and we're talking about abundance change. So we're talking about abundance change. This is obviously it's about the number of individuals we're counting in plots or samples and through time, to tell us how the abundance, the number of these animals or plants is changing. And we have distribution information. So for a lot of different taxa, it's really quite difficult to establish abundance counts and do this in a really standardized way. So we have to fall back on distributional data. But the benefit of the distributional data is that we can actually collect, we've actually collected lots and lots more data from many more species and groups than you can for abundance. So it sort of swings and roundabouts there. An extinction rate is the other main plank of the report, and one of the statistics that we published, and it creates these headlines. An extinction rate is that, the objective IUCN methodology around estimating potential probability of risk of species. So that variable, that's a bit different from the more numerate, the numbers that we get in terms of distribution change and abundance change. So those are the three main categories of information we present. And at the bottom there, in this little schematic, you can imagine a situation sort of on the far left there, where we're counting different populations of a species through time. We have lots of counts from lots of sites. We can combine those together to give us like the best estimate of how a species has changed, how blackbird numbers have changed in the UK or something, or robin numbers or whatever from these different counts. And we can create an indicator where we combine those, sort of the composite, and average those species trends in this thing we call an indicator. And it's the indicators I'll be describing to you, and I'll show you some graphs that look like this. They often start on a fixed to a value of 100, and then they change from 100 onwards, and it's time across the bottom of the graphic. So these describe the average change in species populations, and we also provide some information on saying, out of this picture, what proportion of species in this group are going up and down in number, and we compare those as well to try and provide the most objective information on the state of nature, because that's what we want to achieve. Part of my work in this report is to really nail down the statistics, to make them as strong scientifically as they can possibly be, working with other people. And the results. So I think the one of the top line statistics we have in the State of Nature report is this abundance graphic here. And on the left here, you can see that this abundance graphic, it's an index value starting at the value of 100, and you see it gradually declines through time. And this is an abundance indicator, starts in 1970. It includes population trends of over 750 species, and that's mammals, butterflies, moths, birds. It's a real composite mixture of how nature is changing. And in a way, this is our kind of apex measure, I think, of how biodiversity is changing, abundance and nature is changing in the UK. And it tells us that the figure there is that 19% decline over that time period. And what's more significant in the analyses we've done in background for this statistic and the others in here is that there's no suggestion of a change in the rate of decline through time. This is the fourth State of Nature report, and each time we produce it, the trends continue downwards. There's no let up in that downward trend, and we're using statistical tests to tell us something about the change in slope, and there's no indication there. And as I said, sometimes we pull out statistics just to show you, that's the average pattern, but what's happening to species. And you can see this balanced picture where 38% of the species in this index have declined over time, balanced against only 27% that are increasing. So of course, nature's changing all the time. Some species are going up, some species are going down, but this is the composite picture. And the balance overall is kind of downwards. And that's the kind of sobering, depressing conclusion we get from this report. And moving on to show you some of the patterns of change, it's worth saying that I'll mainly describe the UK results. The UK State of Nature report is 200 and something pages long. It's a really detailed piece of work, but we in the teams also work to produce England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland versions of these reports as well. So there are in fact kind of 5 reports, and the graphic here shows you that species abundance indicator for England and Scotland and Wales here, showing you again, as we've described, this consistent pattern of change, and it's a downward pattern. And you might also notice here that the species trends, the decline in species trends in England is quite a lot more pronounced than in Wales and Scotland. And they aren't completely comparable, but I think that was one of the signals we got from the report, which was quite alarming in a way, that things in England, where we have some of the best monitoring information, are really, not getting any better at all. Quite the reverse for quite a few species taxa groups. And on the right-hand side, I just wanted to flag that, the data we get from the different countries, it isn't all comparable. And that's particularly the case in Northern Ireland, where we have to deal with the data sets in a slightly different fashion. But that's just to say, just to flag to you, it was a huge effort to pull together the UK report, but we have dedicated teams, pulling together results and a narrative around conservation and conservation action specific to the frameworks in those countries. And there are, there are bold plans to develop strong biodiversity targets now in Wales and Scotland, and this work will contribute towards those. In the marine realm, I mean, most of what I've talked about is about sort of the terrestrial system, on land and freshwater systems. They're the species groups I've talked to you about, where the monitoring is really quite good. Kind of birds and butterflies, lots of the insects. There's really good information. The plants as well, which amazing information. But in the marine system, we are much more limited in the information we have in terms of measuring biodiversity change in a sort of in an objective and a rounded sort of fashion. This is one of the government indicators, which is the abundance of seabirds, and you can see here the time frame here is quite short, actually, from 1986. But there's a 13% decline in the seabirds, average seabird populations here. So the average decline 24%, sorry, since 1986. And of course, this graphic, in fact, predates the impacts of avian influenza. So many of you must be aware of this really very worrying, devastating impact of highly pathogenic avian influenza on particularly on seabird populations in the last 2 years, but also on other birds on land and even mammal species. And globally, kind of bird populations in the Americas and so on, South Africa, have been so very severely hit. So in the marine realm, the information is less good, but it seems to support this picture of some decline. And so what I talked to you about there were patterns of change in abundance, which is, as I said, kind of our best biodiversity measure, I think, and most useful measure we've got. But for other groups outside the birds and the butterflies and things where you can count them quite specifically, we have to rely and fall back on having information on distributional changes. So you can see here for plants, having distributional information, we're very, very lucky in the UK that we had this wonderful plant atlas published recently. The plant atlas provides information in distributional change of flowering plants and the bryophytes. So the sort of lichens, the liverworts and that group of species plants, as well as information on lichens. And if you look at the vascular plants, since 1970, the distribution of vascular plants, they're the flowering plants in the United Kingdom, have declined by over half. That's a really amazing figure. And if you go to the bryophytes, the mosses and the liverworts are in the bryophytes, the hornworts and things, they've declined by 59%. So I think that was one of the most shocking results that we were able to work with the very smart guys behind the Plant Atlas. Huge effort there to show this very big decline in these plants and the closely related species. But there's positive as well there, and lichens are one of the examples in the report where you can imagine. We know that the cleaning up of much of the pollution, industrial pollution, going back decades now from industrial times in the United Kingdom, um, the cleaning of the air has meant lichen populations have genuinely bounced right back. And lichens are a success story. We had regulation to improve air quality, and the result is the recovery of many, many lichen populations. But it's not all of them, and certainly some of the lichen populations that are more sensitive to sort of ammonia pollution and some of the other, the pollutants that are becoming more common in the environment now, they are still threatened. But it's a picture of kind of loss and gain here. And to move on to invertebrates, so there's a lot of discussion, isn't there, around kind of insectageddon and insect declines globally and in different places. We're able to pull together distributional change on invertebrates, modeled here for nearly 5,000 species in the United Kingdom. So it's an amazing statistic, and it shows you this pattern of change, this decline in the invertebrate populations in the UK. The decline here in distribution is about 13% since 1970. But 1970 is this sort of period when systematic monitoring really started to kick into action in the UK. So that's why we use 1970. There's nothing special about that time other than the kind of data becoming available. And among those invertebrate groups, on the right-hand side there, the top graph shows you, if you look at some of those invertebrates, the insects and the other groups that are providing pollination services, the pollinators, they're declining quite rapidly. The pollinators themselves are declining by considerable value there, along with the pest control species as well. So species that are providing invertebrates providing really important function for us in the environment, for those pollinators and the pest controls in crops, that they're declining quite considerably. But at the same time, we can see the freshwater cycling species. These are the mayflies and stoneflies and damselflies. You can show that they show this really weird pattern of rapid decline in the 80s and 90s, and then a very rapid recovery. And again, like the sort of lichen story, we know in this case, regulation around cleaning our rivers and removing particular pollutants from the river systems led to this massive recovery in lots of freshwater invertebrates of different kinds. And that's a sort of positive story, yet it's now stalling. And there's growing evidence to show the stalling of the recovery in the freshwater system seems very strongly linked to things like pollution from sewerage, which many of you will have heard in the press on a regular basis, and pollution from the runoff from agriculture. Ammonia and phosphates are really changing the environment. And another statistic that I think it sort of struck me in the report, and this is information on mammals, changes in the distribution of mammals, small mammals, medium-sized mammals in the environment. Those small mammal populations, the voles and the mice and things, their distribution since 1970 has fallen really quite considerably through time. So this is just the common abundant voles and mice you might have seen when you were a kid just running around in the countryside. They're really declining, and I think that's another strong sign of kind of environmental change in the UK, which is really quite worrying. A nearly 30% decline in small mammal populations, slightly smaller level of decline in the smaller side mammals, mustelids and hares and those sorts of species, rabbits and so on. So that's the picture of change. And I think the the statistic that sort of brings this together is this figure of the proportion of species out of a very large basket. We can look at over 10,000 species. We're able to look at systematically the extinction risk of those species in the United Kingdom. And this is one of the big headline figures from the State of Nature report, the fact that 16% of the UK species are threatened with extinction from Great Britain. And we know that 151 species, you know, we can put a name to, have been lost altogether, that they're extinct in the United Kingdom. Some of them, many of them occur elsewhere on the European mainland and so on. Some of those species have gone forever. The great auk was once a species that lived around UK coasts, you know, a species extinct globally. And the graphic here, the little coloured graphic, you know, the dark and the red colours are highlighting higher levels of threat of extinction in these different species groups. And the overall figure at the top there is that 16% species threatened in a basket of 10,000 species. And there are some quite alarming numbers within species groups as well that jump out at you, sort of amphibians and reptiles. Over 30% of those the species we have in the UK threatened with extinction. Birds, over 40% of birds threatened with extinction. Vascular plants, 22%. So, you know, there are some really important stories here, you know, that we can't tell the whole story in State of Nature, but it points to sort of particular patterns within species groups. Now, just to keep going, as I said, we wanted to also use the report to really focus on the heroic efforts, the passionate efforts of conservationists, you know, right around the UK and of course across the globe, who are working to make things different and improve things. And the picture here is one of those cases. This is Forsenard, one of RSPB's reserves up in northern Scotland, where amazing work is going on year on year to rehabilitate and put back peatland species and communities, like in this wonderful picture here, by removing non-native trees, but by blocking up drains such that the water can remain on these bogs. And we're seeing an amazing recovery of dunlin and greenshank populations and the vegetation structures and invertebrates in these communities coming back. We really can do large-scale landscape conservation recovery. So that's an example kind of on land. There are lots of examples, in fact. And here's a lovely example in the marine system. This is a seabed picture in Lyme Bay, where back in 2008, this nature reserve marine protected area was put in place, and bottom trawling was banned in this area. And since then, Lyme Bay has really recovered amazingly. Species abundance and richness has bounced right back. So it shows you that kind of, you know, when we do conservation and we do it well, you know, we have the tools and the knowledge. What we think is a big issue here is simply, you know, are we working fast enough? Is the pace of our actions and responses fast enough, and is it extensive enough? You know, is it broad enough to make a real difference? And these are some of the factors we reflect on in our report. This graphic just shows you some of what we're doing and kind of puts some numbers to what is happening at what rate. And you can see that if we just focus on the middle bar here in brown, this is the work to do to restore peatlands like Forsenard I showed you, and Lake Vyrnwy in Wales and so on. And you can see that, you know, per year, you know, amazing work is going on. 5,000 hectares are being restored per year. But at the same time, the little bars in the middle, the vertical bars in the middle, are telling us that, you know, less than 25% of the peatland area in the UK is considered to be in good condition. So we need to do more, both to put these habitats back, but there's a really big job that we've neglected to manage the sites that are already, you know, kind of in the protected area network. You know, we have, you know, quite extensive protected area network within the United Kingdom. And of course, we have great ambitions to within the global biodiversity framework. There are ambitions to protect 30% of our land and seas to be well managed for nature by 2030. But there's a lot more, there's a lot more room to go. We need to do a lot more to get there, and for that land to be properly managed for nature. And that's the same kind of for broadleaf woodlands and for salt marshes, where a lot of work's going on to put habitat back, with the multiple benefits in all these cases of protecting nature, but protecting us from climate effects as well, really tackling climate change at the same time. And the last couple of slides, this was a slide just to say something about the coverage. We were really very pleased to get very broad scale pickup of the State of Nature report from all the main news channels in the UK. So from Channel 4 News to BBC Breakfast and ITV News at 10. And we had our colleagues in the countries and regions talking to the local, the country-based news outlets. And on the right-hand side, the little tweet here comes from Nature Resources Wales. So this is an example of how the message is coming from the wildlife community, but the State of Nature Partnership much more broadly, including the statutory agencies. And what we're saying in terms of the communications around this report are absolutely kind of identical. We're side by side each other, saying this is the state of nature. These are the things we really must address from now. And my last slide, this is the last slide, and it's that catchphrase that I described to you a bit earlier on, where State of Nature report, I think what does stand out at the end is that factor that we have brilliant information, we have great people working on nature conservation in the United Kingdom. We have ambitions set in law in England. We have ambitions in globally and in the other countries. We've never had a better understanding of the state of nature and what is needed to fix it. And what is needed to fix it now is more action. So that's where we kind of get to, and that's the strapline of state of nature. And it's worth saying, the purpose of the state of nature is to provide that solid, unified consensus view on the status of nature, and kind of what is needed. The next step, of course, is much more a question of politics and decision makers, and that's where the debate is now happening. But I think at that point I was going to stop sharing, David, and come out of these slides.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Richard, for kind of bringing us up to date on the situation with this report. And obviously, it's a very important report that we need to take very seriously. And there's a few things that I wanted to kind of quickly talk about. Firstly, I love the idea that it's the positive spin that's been put on it, in that, okay, this is the situation, but we know what we need to do. We know actually more than ever before what we need to do. And, you talked about citizen science and the fact that the UK in particular is really hot on that. And it is so true, even on a very local level. I mean, I look at my local patch in West London, Wormwood Scrubs, and, I've been birding there for the best part of 30 years, I'd imagine. And I kept and others kept meticulous notes as to what was breeding, the numbers of all the birds, not just the rarities. And it's interesting because since I've kind of moved away, which was about 8 years ago, all that stopped. And I suddenly realized that actually, the moment you stop, then it's like you got to start all over again, because then people like the developers, for example, HS2 in my case, the high-speed railway link, they looked at what was available in terms of information when they were looking, and there was nothing. So they disregarded the fact that there were breeding meadow pipits on that land, the closest colony to central London. as far as they're concerned, it wasn't there on the day they were looking, and no one was talking about it because no one was keeping any records. So it validated their sort of destruction of part of the area. So it just shows just how important citizen science is, because even on a very local level, and I think that's the thing that we need to remember, because the report you talked about, it's for me, it's a national, international report. And I imagine people walking down the high street in any city or town in Britain thinking, well, that's happening over there.
Yeah.
How can I make a difference? How would you answer that, Richard?
I think you're right that it's hard to convey that the level of kind of spatial grain that this acts on, and the fact that it's kind of this is nature's not some distant esoteric thing for people to have an interest in, or it to relate to them. It's actually, it's actually, it's a basic requirement for that supports them to live in their lives and to live well in their lives and so on. So I think one of the things with the data you were describing there was that it always strikes me that so we have this big national picture of data, but if you drill into it a little bit, it rapidly goes back to one person, David Lindo at the Wormwood Scrubs, recording this information here and contributing it to a national database. So it allows us to go from, kind of the big scale right down to the small scale to inform things where decisions are really being made, where it really affects people. So I think it's hard for us to sort of appeal to everybody and to touch them with the stories in the report, but we do try hard. And I suppose another way of doing that is that, but by bringing out really specific examples. So if I say to you the geometric mean of species abundance has declined 19%, it's kind of almost meaningless, isn't it? But if I tell you that, we're fighting to bring back natterjack toads and Duke of Burgundy butterflies and the large marsh grasshopper, these are all species and things we're doing an amazing job with, and we're bringing them back. So we did try and focus on kind of something a bit more tangible and real to focus people on, kind of in different environments. But whether we achieve that properly in the urban environment, David, well, you're probably the best person to judge us on that.
Well, the thing is, I mean, by the way, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put your hand up or actually put a question in the chat. Going back to your question, Richard, I think, I mean, I have a whole sort of, I can talk for hours in terms of how I feel about this, because a lot of it's down to the fact that people are just totally disconnected. So it doesn't mean much. But let's just talk about that in a second. I want to sort of talk about what's happening with this report, because at the end of the day, it is the people in power that are actually the sort of the main kind of masters of what can happen. And the government we have, I mean, I have never really been a political animal until the last few years, because I look with disdain and disbelief at what I'm hearing when it comes, for example, to the environment. I was talking to you just before we pressed the record button about hearing from the Minister of Environment talking about the right to roam, well, basically loosely talking about that, but saying that the farmers are the custodians of the countryside, and if anyone has the right to roam, it's their livestock. And I'm thinking, this person has no connection with anything. And
Yeah.
the thing is, we kind of touched, or you touched on farming, and the fact, and I read the report, and one of the things in the report was saying, one of the points was that farming, we need more nature-friendly farming, full stop. And I think farming is a very misunderstood area, because when I talk to people about farming, and if they're farmers, automatically they bristle because you're a conservationist and it's almost like us versus them. I remember watching Countryfile, a TV program, and there was a representative from the National Farmers Union berating people for blaming them for the lack of diversity and what have you. And I've since found out that not many farmers are actually members of this particular organization. And by the way, I'm not disrespecting that organization. I'm just quoting what I heard. But it made me think, what is the problem? Having seen examples of nature farming, nature-friendly farming, and I'm actually going to have a guest, by the way, in December, who runs a farm, Hope Farm, which is connected to the RSPB. She's going to be talking about their farm. But what is the problem? How is it so difficult to to allow nature to prosper? For the layperson, is it because the government are saying, we only give you money if you do this, or you need to produce this amount? How does it work?
Well, it's a bit of it's a complex one, isn't it, David? And there are sort of people come with a preset view and stuff. So rapidly, I think that the debate becomes kind of polarized and kind of unhelpful and so on. And I think people sort of miss the point as well. So in our report, as you said, you've looked at it. We're focusing quite a lot on saying we want nature-friendly farming, and we focus on people like, the nature-friendly farming network. There's a wonderful kind of farmer-led revolution in how we farm, because as you know, and everybody will know, that there are great farmers out there who really have a connection to nature, and to the environment, and they're doing really great things. And I think it's important that we don't have this sort of them and us language. It's not them and us. It's just us. Do you see what I mean? It's us, and we need to kind of work together to fix those problems. And behind the scenes, this happens a lot. In fact, perhaps more than people would think. But like I suppose when the headlines from the State of Nature came out last week, in some areas it rapidly polarized as to what people were saying. And I even saw headlines saying, farmers, we aren't anti-nature, so that was like in the Farmers Weekly or something, and that completely missed the point of the whole report. None of it said that. Nobody said that. We, in fact, behind the scenes, the RSPB and State of Nature partners, we met with NFU, in fact, and CLA and quite a lot of the other important organisations who represent the farming community and so on. We met with them weeks before the report came out to share privately, confidentially what it was saying, to talk together about what we wanted to say about it. So we're trying as hard as we can to sort of build partnerships and to get on a more sensible basis of communication. These are the facts. We've got one planet. We've got an issue around climate and biodiversity and food security. But it's not going to help anybody to split into 20, 100 different groups and fight, is it? That's not going to get us anywhere. So I do think we need to work together much more closely. And I suppose you mentioned that there's some of the pronouncements from the political parties recently, and I suppose I'm a scientist, so I work in a rational world where I believe in using the best information to make the best sort of judgments about environmental decisions. But some of what we've heard recently from the different political parties is so frustrating and confusing. Where are we heading? And I suppose we have a really febrile moment in politics in the United Kingdom, don't we? And we have a general election, or looming potentially. So I think that all plays into it, and that all plays against potentially making really good decisions for the environment, for people, for the future. So that's what we need to sort of address, and that's getting a bit heavy, isn't it? But there we go.
Well, I think it's a general disregard for science these days, and also anyone who's got any kind of activism or who feels the need to speak up about the conservation of our environment nowadays, and particularly by this government, you're kind of labeled as an eco-terrorist, and every step of the way you're being clamped down and stopped from actually trying to speak up and say how you feel about what's happening and how a lot of people are feeling, really. So I think it sort of, again, brings this helplessness back to people. They kind of feel, well, what can I do? But the thing is, I in my lifetime, I've seen a decrease. I've seen it, and I'm talking about urban areas. I've been birding urban areas all my life in London, and I've seen over life the decrease of wildlife. I go out into the countryside, in inverted commas, in southern England, and I just see a lot of monoculture. And I'm sad because children are growing up thinking that's the countryside. And I think that's been a bit of a problem because you then have this thing in your mind that all farmers farm the same way. It's all that sort of big field of rape, big field of barley, whatever, and nothing else. And you also then marry the information you've received that corn buntings and skylarks are all, and lapwings behind me are all kind of, decreasing. So it kind of fills me with despair because I think, we're produced, you guys have produced a really great report, which, people like myself and other people have contributed to in many ways. And you kind of think, where's it going from here? I mean, I look at the facts on one of the facts written in the report. 11% of all land in the UK is protected, but not all is well managed. And I'm thinking, how is that? Why is that? What's the point of protecting areas if you don't manage it? I don't understand that.
Yeah. It's a frustration, and I think behind the scenes, I explained how the State of Nature Partnership is all the research organisations coming together, the statutory agencies with the environmental agencies and stuff. And I think the fact that you've quoted that figure, and that figure's published in a joint report, would never have happened 5-10 years ago, David. So kind of, I know that might not seem enough, but I think we're moving to a much greater common view about where we are with nature, because a short time ago, we were being told that 28% of the UK was protected for nature and managed for nature, and research by me and my team actually has shown, well, when you look into the evidence, when you look at the science, that's not right. So that's where the 11% comes from, and that's true for lots of the other statistics kind of we have in this report. The amount of land that's being well managed for nature, in agri-environmental schemes. Some of the statistics would tell you it's a very large number, but when you look at it in a more forensic way, and this report is quite a forensic, assessment of nature and so on, the evidence there points to a much smaller number. So at each point we're kind of challenging different views, that exist in this kind of conservation community. The government alongside, the conservation researchers, the academics together to come to a common view, and I think that is a positive. In my view, I might be being naive there, but the fact that we recognise, really where we are, I think really makes a big difference to deciding collectively where we're going to go next. What's the North Star, or what's the next stepping stone that we want to move to, and so that the common narrative, the common understanding is being much more widely accepted, I think, and only when you can do that, I think, can you move on.
Okay, we have a question from Jim. Hello, Jim. Jim Wright. Are you? Your mic's not on yet. There you go. Still can't hear you, Jim. Still can't hear you, Jim. But I've got your question. It says, even if we make improvements, we can't do much about the conditions in their wintering grounds. This is talking about birds now, migrant birds in Africa, or on migration routes through mainland Europe, or can we?
Well, I think it's a challenge, isn't it, for migratory birds that are in quite some trouble in the United Kingdom and across Europe. Yes, it's a great challenge, isn't it, to try and to think how we would affect protection across the pockets of habitat that they need right across, thousands of miles, thousands of kilometers, and lots of countries. Um, we can do things, and we are doing things, aren't we, to protect turtle doves from hunting, for example. We're working hard to remove kind of illegal songbird persecution and trapping in different countries. So we can do things like that, um, and we can work kind of in an odd sort of way, that the way that we can help some of these migrant birds uh, might actually be right here among us. Things you do in your back garden could be helping the productivity of these birds, because these migrants, there's an argument in the literature that says, of course we must protect them um, right across the flyway wherever they occur. But of course, to increase numbers, you have to increase productivity, and they're nesting and living in Europe. So if we could boost the productivity, if we could boost, quality of habitat across Europe in protected areas, in gardens, in on farmland, you could boost productivity such that you could sort of accommodate some losses elsewhere, because you're always going to have losses. So that's one of the arguments about what we can do, and lots of us, David and others, I mean, lots of us are doing a huge amount to try and affect better protection across these flyways, but it's a big challenge, um, particularly with kind of the growing threat of climate change, kicking in a very visible fashion.
Yeah, Jim's got a second part to his question. There's quite a long section on the impact of offshore wind farms on seabirds and other marine life. And he's saying, how confident are you that they are not claiming the lives of birds such as redwings, fieldfares, and waxwings?
That's not a particular area of expertise or anything the report goes into. But we are, perhaps you know that the RSPB is, we're investing a lot of time to do a lot of research around seabird mortality, particularly to try and understand, lots of other organizations too, to look at kind of flight paths and the impacts of wind farms, both actually on land and at sea, and how they're affecting bird mortalities. So it is something we're very, very concerned about, and it's something we're researching rather, in some considerable detail. But sort of passage migrant mortality isn't something I've heard reported very much, but it could be that it's just not being reported because of the problem of kind of reporting, birds dying at sea. So I can follow that up for you, Jim, and find out more from my colleagues.
Yeah, and Jim's got more. Does the RSPB ever talk to representatives of the agrochemical industry?
Yes, we talk to everybody, and we're there at the big farming conferences and meetings that happen, every year, cereals and the Oxford Real conferences and things. We do, but I think they are, perhaps behind that question is the whole issue around how we develop a food production system in the UK, and elsewhere globally, that's more in line with nature and not kind of fighting nature and not against nature. And I think that's a big driver in what we're seeing. And there was a piece of work that me and a European team published on birds, in fact, that showed the biggest driver of bird declines across Europe that we could find in the last 20, 30, 40 years came down to pesticides and fertilizers. That was the biggest indicator of bird declines across Europe, taking into account climate and everything else at the same time. So agrochemicals, how the industry works in the farm production system is a really important area, and many people are calling for kind of big reductions, removal of pesticides, inorganic fertilizers because of the damage that they're doing to the wildlife and the damage they're doing to your kind of additional the system more generally, water courses and so on and so forth.
In your view, not so much as a scientist, but emotionally as a human, why do you think there's this war on the environment? Why do you think there's such apathy in terms of turning things around? Because we've seen from the report that it doesn't take much. It takes almost a little bit of TLC and results come fairly quickly. So why is there this reticence to try and conserve?
Yeah, I'm not sure, David. I'm not sure. So kind of, I think there's growing recognition that nature underpins life, isn't there? We have the fabric of life is supported by nature, but perhaps we just haven't done a good enough job to communicate that. The fact that if you want clean, healthy food, water, air, if you want uh, peace of mind, solace and connection with nature, because we know it's good for mental health, it's good for physical health, it's good for soulfulness in lots and lots of ways. But up to now in society, it's often been seen as the fact that you and I are bird watchers, David. We're kind of we're just hobbyists. We're marginal. Our interests are marginal. But whereas in truth, the interest in the environment, are absolutely central to the fabric of life, of human life. But it's taking us a long time to get that point, and we're being pushed by existing kind of structures and power systems that are so well established that they push against it. So you know, conservation. If you look back at what conservation has achieved the last 50, 100 years, I think you have to say, well, what have we achieved? And surely we've got to do more collectively and get more support.
Okay. All right. Well, I think what we'll do, we're gonna close today's session, and I'm gonna quickly tell you that tomorrow, even though if you watch this online, tomorrow doesn't mean anything, but the next In Conservation with will be with a lady called Heather Wolf, and she'll be talking about her book and how to find more birds. And we have some great names coming up in the coming weeks. We've got a fellow called Mark Avery, known to many people, very staunch conservationist, and he'll be talking about the state of conservation as far as he's concerned in the UK. And we've got Mark Cocker, the great writer, talking about swifts. And we've got a lot of stuff coming up. So keep an eye on the listings on the urbanbirderworld.com website. If you're not a member of the Urban Birder World community, consider it, because what's happening next will be a Q&A, and you won't see that unless you are a member. You'll just be seeing what's happening now. And also, if you like what you see, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about it. But Richard, I'd like to thank you for sparing your time to talk us through the report, the State of Nature report 2023, and thank you for kind of making it more clear.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to people, and yeah, I very much hope that in the next weeks and months and so on, that this report has a life and it starts to make a difference, because that's why we're trying to do it.
Well, let's hope that happens. And Zoomers, again, thank you very much for supporting In Conservation With. Hope to see you real soon. But until then, keep looking up.